Today, we are talking about noise at work and why collaboration is not king. Joe McCormack is my guest. He is a best-selling author of the book Noise, Living and Leading When Nobody Can Focus. He also founded the Brief Lab, which trains companies and special military organizations how to become elite communicators. Joe is here to help us find some peace and quiet in this noisy world. What is the quiet workplace?
Everything is about communication. Everything is about information. Everything's like you get in front of your computer and you're on. I mean, all day long you're on. And there's not a break in that whole day, naturally, to stop and do what people do best, which is like, I'm going to decipher what I just read, or I'm going to make a decision, or I'm going to think about something or reflect on it or plan, or like, no, I'm running and consuming and disseminating and digesting information all the time. And it's exhausting. And I think there's a role of building in a place for quiet. And that's what the quiet workplace is about.
Where did this start from you? Obviously, you're an author and you have a whole business called the Brief Lab. And these make sense to connect these two things together. But I guess, where did this start where you're like, man, I'm going to create a business around this?
It's funny because when I started the Brief Lab, it was all about less is more. So it's about trimming the communication so you're not perpetuating the problem, which is over communication. So that was that, and that continues to be a big part of what I do. I teach people how to become concise communicators, and there's a lot of value in that. That saves people time, and it saves people energy, and they found like I can say in 10 minutes what it used to take me a half hour, et cetera. There are moments though. And when I was writing the book Noise is just about the environment that we live in. And it's if you're not brief or you're not concise, you create noise for people. And you just think about a meeting. People don't approach meetings like, okay, well, we're going to make this a 30-minute meeting. No, they just default to an hour and everybody's talking, but like nothing actually gets done and it's talk to talk. It's very noisy, and the environment that we live in is noisy. We're on our smartphones all the time. And I started thinking about, well, how do you combat noise? Well, if you look at the definition of quiet is the absence of noise. So if you go into a restaurant that's quiet, it doesn't mean it's silent. It just means it's less noisy. So the work environment is noisy. It's inherently noisy. It's distracting. There's a lot of disruptions. I mean, if you want to get distracted at work, you'll have no problem doing it. So I started thinking about, well, when and where do people find quiet at work? And the answer is they don't. And they won't. Because the world is wired for it not to be. And I thought, well, we need to change that because it won't just naturally evolve or change itself.
There's different types of noise. Is all noise bad noise? Or how do you kind of see that landscape?
I mean, the thing about information is look at email. I mean, email is a good thing. But being on email and checking email all the time, so untimely information is noisy information. So if I'm having a conversation with you, and this just happened while we were talking, I got a notification from Slack asking for a password, which I don't even need to put in. Well, Slack thinks it's important to talk to me right now in the middle of this conversation with you.
Right.
Now, that's untimely. Now, there might be a time for that if I'm resetting my passwords or whatever, but like technology just sort of like interrupts us constantly. So there's a timeliness to information. There's information that quite honestly is just useless. There's things that you think about while you're working that you should be thinking about at another time. You're trying to think about 10 things at the same time. So this concept of like noise has got to be managed. To be able to that's why the book is called Living and Leading When Nobody Can Focus. Well, you can't focus because you've got constantly all these things competing for your attention. Well, you've got to find strategies to combat that. So everything is competing, and you're trying to do it all, multitasking. There's a ton of research on how just ineffective it is. You have to start developing strategies, and one of them is saying no. And that doesn't mean no permanently. It's like no, not now. So that alert comes on my phone. It's like no, I'm not going to do that right now. And ironically, while we were talking, something else happened on this recording. And so I have like 3 things. I'm listening to you. I'm trying to think of what I'm thinking about. This Slack notification comes in, another thing. It's like that's the world we live in. So we've got to start to exercise self-control and discipline to lower the volume.
Do you think people know this inherently? They just don't have the tools to do something about it? Or do you think that they just don't even have awareness of this?
I think a lot of people, they just feel tired, and they feel like they have to do everything at every moment. Like they feel like they don't have a lot of control over it. They feel helpless.
Yeah.
When you go to work, I don't feel in control of this stuff. I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose. I feel like this is the world that I was born into. And there's a sense of sort of like resignation, like this is the way it is, and I just have to get on the bullet train and just ride it as fast as I can. And so I think people maybe might like it to be different, but there's a sense of helplessness.
I had a close friend he says something to me one time that part of my job is to do email. The way he talks about email is like he has to get through all of the email as part of his job, and he almost treats every single email the same.
Yeah.
We think that everything that comes at us is something that we have to get done or prioritize at some point. The way we see that can sometimes be a little bit confusing, I think.
Imagine if you had like a flood in your basement and you're trying to get rid of the water, but the water's never stops coming in the basement. So you've got a bucket and you're trying to get it out, but as fast as you're getting it out, it's coming in. Technology is the same way.
Right.
So I can be like, there's this illusion to think that I'm going to finally catch up and get rid of it and it'll stop. And the answer is it doesn't stop. So unless people start treating it as something that I need to combat, mitigate, filter, lower, and that's why I call it kind of generically noise, if they don't treat it as a kind of an enemy. So in a moment of distraction, we feel like we have to say yes to everything. So you stop what you're doing and then you give into the distraction. Then the research also says that it takes about 20 minutes to go back to be able to focus on what you were doing when you got distracted.
Right.
People just do it like they just give in, and they feel like, well, that's just the way I live. I mean, when an email comes, I answer it. And when my notification comes, I respond. And it's Pavlovian, actually. So you just respond and you train yourself to do a million things poorly. I think when I started writing this about noise, I started thinking about a couple of ways. One is saying no, not now. But another big one to combat it was quiet. Schedule time for quiet, where I would literally create a moment where I wouldn't have any noise and I would think about things. And I started doing it, and it was really difficult. So difficult that when I was writing the chapter 14 of the book Noise, I'm like, this is the most hypocritical thing I've ever written, because I actually don't do what I was telling the reader to do, which is spend time in quiet every day. And I literally stopped writing the book because I'm not that kind of person that would write a book like, you should do these 17 things, and I actually only do 2 of them. So I started trying to do quiet, and it was really difficult.
So did you pull it off? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel?
No, I'm still terrible at it.
Yeah.
I discovered something really profound that quiet is not a technique; it's an appointment. And the point is, make it and keep it. Meditation and mindfulness and all those things are great in their own right, but they can be experienced as overly technical. How do I do this? And I'm doing it the wrong way and stuff. And I read a quote that says, anything that's worth doing in life is worth doing badly, which gave me immediate permission to be bad at quiet. I heard a quote from a guy once, because I teach a lot of guys in special operations, and what he said to me was, I don't want to be bad at something I'm not good at. And I thought that was hilarious and very profound at the same time. Quiet is like that. It's an appointment, not a technique. And I started scheduling the appointment, and I wouldn't miss it. And it literally changed how I approach my day. And I gave myself that time every day as a non-negotiable. That's why the thing is Quiet Workplace, and the programs are called Quiet Works, because it actually works.
Yeah, it reminds me so much of, we go to the gym, and there's a trainer there, and his whole thing is just like, it's not about the quality of the work, it's about the consistency. If you can just show up and have the worst workout of your life, if you can do that consistently a couple days a week versus have the best workout of your life once a week and not come back for another week, has such a much more powerful, profound effect compared to just worrying about how it actually goes when you do it.
The same is true with anything that's really valuable in life. Anything that's worth doing in life is worth doing badly. So working out is important. Do it poorly.
Yeah.
Quiet is very, very important. In a noisy world, it's incredibly important. And I came to the conclusion that there's no room for it in people's day. So if you think about the question I ask people is, when and where do you go for quiet? In a professional setting, the when could be answered, the where inherently is problematic. Remote working gives people, like, if you work from home, you can go to a quiet place. You can go from your office and go to your living room. Granted that there's nobody in the living room trying to distract you. In a workplace, there's nowhere to go.
Right.
Well, I go to work and game on. I am on consuming and disseminating information 24/7. I'm just going. And that's what work feels like. It feels like
Right.
doing. But where do people think before they talk? The answer is they don't. They do it on the fly, and how they communicate is poor.
Right.
They make decisions. When do you stop and actually think about the decision? Oh, I'm too busy to make. You made a huge decision. You changed your job, or I bought a house, or I bought a pet, and you actually never sat down and thought about it because there was no place to go to think about it.
Right.
And I wanted to challenge that and change the conversation about the role of silence in the workplace by having people answer those questions. When do I do it? I do my quiet time at this time to this time. Where do I do it? I do it in a place. I have a place for it. At home, on the road, and at work, I have places to do quiet. And I want people to do the same thing.
I think there's a sort of a exponential effect on your life. If you can do this at work, I mean, I think everybody can relate to this same problem at home in all aspects of their life, right? That they're making decisions that are going to affect their futures or their business or their employees. It's probably universal in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. If anything's important, you schedule time for it.
Right.
But if you treat it like an appointment, and it's like, all right, so let's just make this up. Like, all right, I get up at 5:00 in the morning or 5:30 in the morning. So what I do is I created a kind of a new ritual where I wake up, make a cup of coffee, and I start my quiet time. I started 5 minutes at a time. It was terrible. It was noisy. I was all over the place. I didn't stop. It was non-negotiable. Then 5 minutes became 10. And now I give myself this moment to start my day this way. And in the afternoon and the evening, I do the same thing. It's the habit of doing that makes people think about things that matter. And you talk about those places like work, at home. Okay, one of the things that I came up with doing this is the most important thing. We have roles, right? So if you think about, I have a role as a father, as a husband, as a coworker, as an author. I mean, all these different roles, right? Volunteer. And in my quiet time, I would ask myself this question. In my role as blank, the most important thing for me to do today is blank. There's a million things to do, but if I don't do the most important thing, I'm going to feel something's off.
Yeah. And that gives you permission to say no to the second most important thing.
That's precisely right. If you don't know what's most important, then you're saying yes to the least important. And this is literally, in a work context, people ask this question, maybe they don't, they should. Where do I create value in my job? Like, why am I valuable to this organization or to this initiative, whatever? Well, if you're doing things that are not valuable, then you're not valuable.
Right.
Well, what happens in information all day long, if I'm just running on a hamster wheel, what happens is I'm actually doing things that make me less valuable by saying yes to things that are less valuable and not saying yes to the things or no to them, to your point.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
comes from quiet. If you don't do quiet, you miss it. It's stolen from. There's no room for it. It's stolen from your calendar. There's no place for it at work. I just work and I don't even know what I'm doing. People talk about this a lot, Matt, and I think that one of the challenges is they overcomplicate it. It starts to get weird. Like, I got to do these 7 techniques, and it's like, no. It's not that hard. It seems like it's that hard, but it's actually not.
Right.
For 10 minutes of quiet, I get to do whatever I want to do for 10 minutes. I can plan my day. I can think about yesterday. I can think about nothing. I can read. I can remember. I can decide. You can do whatever you want. But I would generally say pick 1 or 2 things to do for that time and just try to stick to those things. But choose them. Like, they're not like random. And then start giving that time to yourself to be able to do those things. And then it'll actually slow the day down somehow.
You quote, I think, somebody else when you say, your memory is like penguins on an iceberg. What is that? What does that mean, and how do you combat that?
I mean, you think about like I asked this guy in special operations, how do you remember everything that you need to remember? You got all these things, and he goes, you don't. When you add a new bit of knowledge or information, it pushes a fat penguin off the other side. So the idea is that you
So
can't
it's you're
fit
putting penguins on, and other penguins are falling off.
well, that's exactly right. So I'm like, how do you remember all those things that you know? Because you seem like you're so infinitely knowledgeable. He goes, I don't. For me, the takeaway was like, yeah, stop trying to like fit all the penguins on the iceberg. A fat one's going to fall off the other side. It's okay. He'll get back on.
And how does quiet play into that?
It's creating space, quite honestly, for you to think about like where things fit and how they fit and what am I doing now and why does it matter, and versus just trying to cram it all on there. You know what I mean?
Right. So
You're just trying to cram more in a day.
Being intentional about your penguins. You don't need all the penguins. You just need a few.
Poor
Great
penguins.
penguins.
There's other penguins that need to be more swimming and less standing around on ice, I
Right,
suppose.
right.
There's a lot of different ways to take that analogy, other than the fact that it's hilarious that it's like penguins on an iceberg.
Yeah. But it's information overload. It's what we're dealing with every single day. And how do we deal with that? That's kind of what we're up against.
Yeah, I mean, one more bit of information is going to make all the difference in the world. And the answer is no. It's like the roulette wheel. I keep on doing it. I'm going to win the next time. It's like, no, probably not. Probably not going to win.
So why is quiet the missing ingredient?
If you think about people during a day, people do a lot of talking and a lot of doing. But you have to think before you talk, and you have to think before you do stuff. Where do you do that, and when do you do it? It happens in an instant, sometimes, yeah. But sometimes it needs to happen with more time, and that's why it's missing. If you don't do it, you're not thinking before you're talking. I got to update my boss. Have you thought about it? I'm going to run a meeting. Have you thought about it? When did you do it? How long did you do it? Quiet's missing. It's a missing ingredient. If you do it, it's going to make that time better.
So how do I get quiet in my life, in my workplace, I guess? What's one or two things I could do like right now?
Honestly, schedule it. AM, PM. Think of an amount of time. I picked 5 minutes because there's 12 of them in an hour, right? 6 of them in a half hour. I took 5-minute increments, and I take 5 in the morning and take 5 in the afternoon. And I go, okay, so 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes, not at random times, but like from 8 to 8:05. I have an Apple Watch. You could do a timer, and I just take out my timer. I'm like, start 8, and then it's just quiet. No distractions, no tech, nothing for 5 minutes, and it's over, and I'm done. One of the practices in a quiet workplace is that you need to respect the value of their attention. In interrupting them when you feel like it hurts them. One of the practices is putting up a do not disturb sign or having blocks of time where people can do deep work, or bundling a bunch of things for your boss before you hit him or her 7 times individually. If you look at attention like a fuel, you don't have a 1,000-gallon tank. During a day, you can pay attention well to a certain amount of things. And that attention can be depleted where people get easily distracted. That's one. Quiet's an ingredient. It's powerful. It belongs in the workplace. It deserves a space. I need a place to go.
It's an actual physical space to go that's different from where your normal workspace is.
If I'm at work, I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and now with remote and hybrid and all this other, he's like, I got 10,000 square feet, only about 50 people. I mean, he's got all these cubes that are open. Reclaim that space and make it quiet workspaces. I mean, so if it's sitting there, it's useless. It deserves a space. Maybe it's a conference room from 11 to 2. But don't make it weird, like call it the library and turn all the lights and have people take naps in it. No, just say that this is a place that you go for quiet work, and then there's some rules. You can't be interrupted. You got to check in. You got to check out. It's low tech, no tech, that type of thing. So it deserves a space. Another one is that it should appear on your calendar. I want to see it on your calendar. If it's not there, you're probably not going to do it. It's like working out. You don't just like, oh, I'm going to work out because I feel like it. Tech isn't always necessary. So being in front of a computer doesn't mean I'm working all the time. Sometimes you have to have a no screen time. Just shut it down. Right. I mean, one of the practices is turn it off for 10 minutes. You're not 911, which is another principle, which is everything isn't an emergency. Why do we treat everything as an emergency? There are very few things in my day that are actually emergencies, but I act like everything's an emergency.
Right.
Everybody feels like they're a 911 operator. They're not. So one of the things you need to do is define actually what is an emergency. People have their phone with them like that the worst nightmare is going to happen in a nanosecond, only to find out that most of the time it's just like, Chase Bank has randomly told me that there's a person doing something and it was already approved. Like, whatever. Right. Collaboration isn't always beneficial. We live in a false belief that collaboration is always great. Sometimes collaboration is terrible, especially if it's not preceded by concentration and quiet. Have you thought about how you're going to collaborate with your workers? No, I'm just going to walk in and start talking to people. That whole design of the office space is open floor, no offices. Created massive amounts of chaos. There's nowhere to go to actually think about what you just talked about in the meeting. So you have another meeting. Diving deeper into those things start to create ramifications. Well, if these principles are true, then what would I do? You might need to have more offices. You might need to have times where you don't have meetings. You might need to shut your phone off. What would you do if it's like an if-then statement? If I believe this, then I would behave this way.
What are a few of the key principles of the quiet workplace?
The two key principles are quiet deserves a place and a time in my day. What I mean by that is I need to go somewhere for quiet and I need to have a time to do it. And currently there is no room for quiet in the modern workplace.
The quiet workplace is a business. Like you're giving me all this info for free, but if I wanted to interact with the quiet workplace, what am I buying?
Well, first and foremost, when I started the Brief Lab, the impetus there is to help people become clear communicators, concise communicators. Really saying less is more. The quiet workplace is a business, but first and foremost, I want to change the conversation. The conversations going in a certain direction are all about collaboration and information, and it's all about talking and talk. And I think that game needs to change. I think that people need to think about it differently. So I want to change the conversation first and foremost. And that's a big ask because I don't think that the modern workplace will naturally just wake up and go, what we're doing is wrong and we're heading on the wrong path, and collaboration it's not an either or, it's an and. So I just want to change the conversation about the rule of silence.
What is the conversation we're talking about? It's the conversation about productivity, or
it's actually the conversation has been about collaboration and productivity. And what we're finding is that collaboration without rules, collaboration without quiet creates chaos. And it actually kills productivity because everybody's interrupting everybody all the time under the guise that we're being collaborative. And I believe that we should have collaborative spaces and quiet spaces. We should have collaborative time and quiet time, and they can and should coexist. Now, when you do that, it requires some rules. They don't need to be heavy, over-the-top rules, but they don't exist in the modern workplace. Why? Because collaboration is king. Collaboration's not king. If you don't think before you talk and you don't think before you do, it's not going to be efficient, and it's certainly not going to be effective. It's random, and that needs to change. The programs to do this, one of them is just reading the book Noise. It's not like I'm peddling the book Noise, but the idea is that book is if you don't see that as a problem, then you won't have a need for quiet to combat it. So that's the first thing.
So gaining awareness because people don't even know that this is a problem sometimes.
They've succumbed to it and they're like, this is my life and there's nothing I can do about it. I didn't even think about it. And like, no. I got a letter from an 18-year-old from a client of mine. He was in the Marine Corps. I walked into his office at his headquarters. Before I even sat down in the meeting, he says, could you sign this book for my daughter? It was the book Noise. I hadn't met this guy before. I don't know how he found the book. His daughter had read it, and then she wanted a signed copy, and she sent me a personalized letter saying how the book changed her life as an 18-year-old.
That's kind of profound.
It was profound. It's crazy. It was incredibly humbling and motivating, in which the theme of it was the book challenged her to disconnect. Not permanently. She was so connected to technology, to the sources of noise, that she wasn't doing any of the things that she wanted to in her life. She started 2 clubs at school. She improved friendships. She stopped dating she called him a no good boyfriend. All these things because she was so connected to this noise that she wasn't actually thinking about what she was doing. But in a business context, quiet works in really 2 primary ways. One is for leaders. Getting groups of leaders to start a conversation about how think about like a peer relationship, like the chief marketing officer and the CFO, whatever, the senior leaders of an organization, to do a program together where they can start to collectively change the conversation as leaders. That's one approach. That starts at the top. Another one kind of starts at the bottom is for teams. Getting small teams of maybe 5 people with a team leader. And I envision it kind of like a book club on steroids where they start the conversation reading the book and they start doing some practices, quiet, and talking about it. How did they experience it? What was easy? What was difficult? What would they do differently? What rules would they create? It's almost like a way of a productivity boost or like a changing how we behave at work, but really from the ground up, like in small teams. And that's called Quiet Works for Teams. Either way, top down, bottom up, it's changing the conversation by getting people to experience it, not just talk about it.
It's kind of hard to imagine this place that doesn't exist. Think about younger people that are born with social media as just part of what their brain is made up of.
Here's the thing, it's invisible. Quiet's invisible. So what I'm doing in this program is, because this is my background in marketing and things, is make it visible. So one of them is like a door hanger. You do this for teams and leaders. I have a way of starting to change the conversation. It says, caution, entering a quiet workplace, no talking, please. A smartphone sleeping bag. I put this in my sleeping bag.
I love that.
It needs a nap. You know what I mean? And then you've got this.
Does it have a lock on it? Tell me it has a lock on it or something.
It has a drawstring. It tightens up like that. Okay? This is absolutely money. This is painter's tape. Okay? So you open the painter's tape up and you dedicate a space to quiet by just literally taping it down. And it says caution, attention, warning. And you literally say, you literally cordon off a space going, you put it over a door.
Put it over your kid's mouth.
Yeah, it's not like duct tape. You're not going to get like called by DCFS, but make the invisible visible by and then I give them a little kit. Leaders get a kit, books and notebooks, and I got a Quiet Works notebook, and it's got quotes on the bottom of it, and I just make it visible.
Right.
Remind me, because I will easily forget. Noise doesn't want you to win; it wants to crush you.
It's heavy stuff.
It is heavy. That's heavy.
It doesn't seem like it'd be hard for people to agree with, but it's kind of like anything. It's probably going to be a challenge for them to own it and practice it and learn it and inherit it.
Yeah, yes and no. I think somebody told me this recently, and it was what he said was true. He says there's a tremendous need for this, but I don't know if there's a demand. And what he said was people need it, but they just haven't thought about what it would look like. And you have to show them what it's going to look like. Think about like when the smartphone came out in 2000, whatever, 4, 5, 6. There was a need for it, but people weren't saying, well, I need a smartphone. Or right. It's an unmet need, but we have to change the conversation in order so the demand is, oh, but tell me what that would look like. And then if you make it practical and simple, that's the key. The key is simplicity and practicality. It's not complicated. It's not a technique. It's an appointment. Make the appointment. Make it and keep it is the simplest way for me to explain it. And don't miss it. I got to the point where I literally said this to myself. And I was looking at my phone. And I don't hate phones. It's not that. I got to a point where I looked at it and I said, you work for me. I don't work for you. I tell you what to do. You don't tell me what to do.
Right.
That for me was liberating. It changed my mindset. I was tired of it telling me what to do, and I felt helpless. And I don't feel that way anymore. And when I do, I correct it pretty quickly. And it put things back. I think a lot of people need to make that shift because I think they feel battered.
Yeah. It wears you down, it beats you down. It's a mindset shift. It's hard to imagine this reality that doesn't exist in their life yet, right? Because you're kind of basing things off of what's happened in the past, not what's going to happen in the future. But
Right.
boy, would it be a breath of fresh air to be in control of your life, to be the boss of your phone.
Quiet works. Just give it a chance. Awesome. All right,
Thanks,
Matt.
Joe.
All the best.
You
Tell
too.
Ashley I said hi. All
I will.
right, see ya.